Hey, this is Ted Hicks from Late Night Parents. Ways to follow the show, latenightparents.com. Coming on with a very late night message about the the Tulsa Race Massacre. Going to be really brief. Want to highlight a document that I published earlier today on 3 documentaries to give you a better understanding about the Tulsa Race Massacre. Peace to Information Man who's in the building. If you all know about the Tulsa Race Massacre, is the recreations of the attack featured in the HBO series like Watchmen and Lovecraft Country. Prepare yourself for a serious education over the next few weeks as we lead up to Juneteenth. This past Monday marked the 100th anniversary for our worst acts of racial violence in American history, the Tulsa Race Massacre. Back in 1921, a mob of white people tore down and burned the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a segregated part of the city so prosperous and bustling, it was known as Black Wall Street. According to some historians, over 1,200 homes and buildings were destroyed by the violence, killing between 100 and 300 people. But thanks to white-dominated power structures in the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma, news about the massacre was wiped away from many official sources for decades. Several fans of Watchmen and Lovecraft Country have told me that they've never heard of the massacre before these fictional TV shows dramatized the attack during their episodes last year and in 2019. These 3 documentary films and TV programs are reminding Americans how deadly unchecked racism can be. Here's a capsule review of 3 powerful films I found most compelling from the History Channel, CNN, and PBS. Watch at least one of them to learn the kind of American history that should have been taught in classrooms and from school books nationwide for the past 100 years. We're going to do a quick screen share.
The destruction was so complete. The suffering was so biblical. The betrayal was so profound.
Black communities deserve the opportunity to confront the past.
Our city has been stuck since then. We've never recovered.
Tulsa was the best place in the nation for African Americans.
And everything from hotels, theaters,
Doctors, lawyers.
People refer to it as Black Wall Street.
Showing Black people that a new world was possible.
The Tribune published a story titled "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator." It was a false narrative to keep Black people in their place, to reinforce white supremacy.
All across Tulsa, angry whites are now organizing. They get their guns, they get their torches. At that point, they start moving towards Greenwood. All hell broke loose.
Another is the rifles are killing the colored folks.
Firing into homes.
Bombs dropping from the air.
It was just an all-out massacre.
Now, one of those men who participated in the race massacre were ever brought to justice.
The Tulsa Tribune refused to write anything about the massacre for more than 50 years. Victims were being buried in unmarked graves across the city. The reason we understand the history of the massacre is that certain survivors decided to talk about it.
My mother saw 4 men coming toward our house, and all of them had torches.
We would be looking for the remains of those who were lost so tragically.
This is so beautiful and sad at the same time.
to do something about what happened in Tulsa.
There cannot be any justice till there is proper respect, restitution, and repair.
Tulsa Burning, the 1921 race massacre, which aired yesterday on the History Channel, is easily the most cinematic of the three documentaries. Small surprise, given its pedigree. It was co-directed and executive produced by Emmy winner Stanley Nelson. The film is also executive produced by NBA superstar Russell Westbrook. Yes, the same Russell Westbrook who had the popcorn thrown on him a few days ago. Featuring original music from Branford Marsalis. The story begins with the words of Reverend Turner's bullhorn unspooling into an epic tale of how Black people migrated to Tulsa and built a bustling, successful business district, keeping dollars in the Black community until 2 days of mob violence destroyed it all. Archival footage of Greenwood, looking impossibly clear and vivid, appears next to photos and inspired commentary from experts like the New York Times columnist Brent Staples and historian Scott Ellsworth. The result is a detailed, evocative story of its massacre and the connection to modern Tulsa, including a renewed modern effort to find mass graves. This compelling film is also paired with a 6-part podcast produced by the History Channel and WNYC Studios, basically in collaboration with KOSU Public Radio in Oklahoma, dubbed The Blind Spot, Tulsa Burning. The second documentary that's going to be available is Dreamland, The Burning of Black Wall Street.
There was nothing that you could not do.
From executive producers LeBron James and Maverick Carter.
People call it the Black Wall Street.
White Tulsas murdered Black folks. Victims were buried in unmarked graves.
There was a systematic cover-up.
We have a responsibility to find the truth.
Dreamland, the burning of Black Wall Street.
As mentioned, this film features another NBA star, LeBron James, as an executive producer, adding evocative animation sequences to newsreel footage and archive photos to recreate those scenes from 100 years ago. CNN film traces history similar to Tulsa Burning, bringing cameras to modern Tulsa's modest Greenwood district to show off small businesses, continuing a historic legacy, and detail maps display how much of the area has shrunk from its successful heights 100 years ago. While Black people in 1921 enjoyed a community, one expert says it was like Bourbon Street, Harlem, Washington, D.C. rolled into one. Racist and resentful white Tulsans, used those epithets to describe the area. Named for a popular theater in the Greenwood district, Dreamland uses actors to read powerful quotes from politicians and publications of the time. including Tulsa's mayor during the massacre, T.D. Edwards, who blamed the black victims of the attack for instigating a Negro uprising. Reverend Turner shows up here also, pointing out areas in his church's basement where victims huddled while the top floors of the church were destroyed. Reverend Turner stated, "I believe there's no expiration date on morality," the pastor says, explaining why he remains an aggressive advocate for uncovering the mass graves and finding justice for the city's black community. The last documentary is Tulsa, the Fire and the Forgotten Trailer.
This was one of the worst incidents of racial violence in U.S. history.
An unruly white mob destroyed part of this city, which was the black community.
They had just gained their freedom. They're just getting a foothold and building something for themselves and for their futures. And within 2 days, in the most horrific way, everything that they hoped for was gone.
You have people a generation out of slavery who built something that no one else could have done.
African Americans in Tulsa, Oklahoma should have those same banners above their hotels, above their barbershops that say since the 1910s, and yet they don't.
We know that no white person was ever held accountable for any offense relative to that.
There was government-sanctioned torture and terrorism. That's the history of Tulsa, going back to the 1921 massacre. And Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma have never made amends for that.
If you don't know your history, it will repeat itself. Well, it's repeating itself.
It is terrifying because you realize that it could happen today.
The militia represented Saturday before last is the exact same mob that was represented in 1921 when the massacre took place.
I guess the great hope is that this will never happen again if you tell the story. But until they obtain justice for this massacre, there can't be healing.
Tulsa, the Fire and the Forgotten, which also premiered on PBS, was basically a more personal story. So consider this film focused on the work of longtime Washington Post journalist Deneen L. Brown, whose reporting on the Tulsa race massacre has spread word about history of the attack. Brown, whose father lives in Tulsa and is a pastor at a Baptist church in town, is shown interviewing descendants of the attacked victims and experts leading to the modern day effort to find and exhume unmarked graves. She also serves as a producer of the film alongside human rights investigator Eric Stolver, who is featured in interviews as an expert source. The film is narrated by NPR's own Michelle Martin, weekend host of All Things Considered. Viewers learned of failed efforts to sue the government for failing to protect the community. Descendants were told that statute of limitations had passed. And the film shows how graphic photos of the destruction were turned into postcards and distributed by some white people. Here, the search for evidence of unmarked graves is presented as a bit of a cliffhanger as experts work to identify likely areas for the remains, hoping to prove they are the discarded bodies of the massacre victims. Just want to take time out, say thank you for those of you that were able to view this live. Those of you that will be able to review this as an archive or a replay. And this is Ted Hicks from Late Night Parents.